This is an ad by BetterHelp. What comes to mind when you hear the word gratitude? Maybe it's a daily practice, or maybe it feels hard to be grateful right now. Don't forget to give yourself some thanks by investing in your well-being. BetterHelp is the largest online therapy provider in the world, connecting you to qualified professionals via phone, video, or message chat. Let the gratitude flow. Visit BetterHelp.com to learn more and save 10% on your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com.
Welcome back, everybody. It's Wednesday, November 13th, 2024. Born on this date in 1837, James T. Rapier of Florence. Now, he was a black congressman who served one term during Reconstruction. And in 1899, famed archer Howard Hill of Wilsonville. Today, we're going to talk about one of the Trump appointments, more Coca-Cola branding in Birmingham, Ella Langley, and why some residents are having to see orange and white every single day. Then after the break, we're going to hear from veteran political news reporter and columnist Bill Cotterell on Florida's experience with early in-person voting, something that some have said they'd like to see Alabama try again. Now, Bill also covered President Jimmy Carter's campaign, so we'll get him to reflect on that. Also, don't leave the windows down in your truck today because it might rain. My name's Ike Morgan, and we're down in Alabama. For a bit, it looked like Alabamians might serve consecutive stints as secretaries of defense. Lloyd Austin of Mobile, of course, has served in that role in the Biden administration. And Congressman Mike Rogers, a Sachs Republican, was listed as a contender for the position under ex-president / president-elect Trump, reports AL.com's Howard Koplowitz. Rogers was first elected to Congress in 2003, and he's currently the chair of the House Armed Services Committee. Instead, Trump tagged Pete Hegseth for the job. Hegseth is an Army veteran who served in Iraq and Afghanistan and has been a Fox News host for 8 years. He's been awarded 2 Bronze Stars and a Combat Infantryman's Badge. Coca-Cola Bottling Company United is putting more branding on Birmingham by buying the naming rights for the new downtown amphitheater, reports AL.com's Mary Colurso. Now, back in early summer, we found out the company was building an expanded $330 million bottling facility that's supposed to have a big visual impact along Interstate 5920. Now, Coca-Cola United has signed a 10-year deal that brings us the Coca-Cola Amphitheater, which is expected to be finished by summer. A first concert was announced last month, by the way. On August 15th, 2025, the Coca-Cola Amphitheater will welcome none other than Teddy Weems. Now, full disclosure, I'm not sure who that is either, but I do know that whenever the YouTube views tank, there'll be a Country Duets album deal waiting for him. There are a handful of reasons why recently the country singer Ella Langley has come across your radar. First, she has that humorous sort of talking song with Riley Green called You Look Like You Love Me. Whether you get your music from TikTok, Spotify, videos, or the old-fashioned radio, it's been playing there. Now, as AL.com's Heather Gann reported, you also might have seen a video of her slipping and falling at John T. Floor's country store outside San Antonio. John T's is an institution in Texas. Langley totally took out her guitar player on the way down, by the way. If she was wiping out, she wasn't going to wipe out alone, which kind of sounds like a good country song. Well, if you get your entertainment from late night TV, you may also have seen Langley on The Tonight Show Monday evening. Now, Langley's a 25-year-old who's been making a mark as a songwriter and has a few promo singles out. And now she has a hit with an album cut and a viral spill. She'll be at the Sand in My Boots Festival in Gulf Shores in May. They figured the sand might make for a softer landing. The city of Calera, reports AL.com's Howard Koplowitz, says it's getting hammered by complaints over the paint job on a new water tower on County Road 12. This one might be worse than a call for a good time graffiti job. You see, the water tower is not only orange and white, but it's orange and white checked, like the end zones at Neyland Stadium. Now, this visual indiscretion right smack in the middle of central Alabama triggered responses on social media that often began with anger and ended with Roll Tide. Now, in order to get back in the good graces of the public, the city of Calera told its side the Alabama way. It explained how the design is actually the federal government's fault. Because it is. Quote, believe it or not, this eye-catching design is federally mandated by the FAA because of the tower's proximity to the Shelby County Airport, end quote. Hey, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk with Bill Cotterell about Florida's early voting and more. Y'all stay with us.
Time to move? Skip the hassles of selling during the holiday season and sell your home directly to Opendoor. Request an all-cash offer in minutes, close, and get paid in days. You can even pick your close date so you can move after New Year's. Start your move at Opendoor.com or download the Opendoor app. Opendoor is represented by Opendoor Brokerage Inc., license 02061130 in California, and Opendoor Brokerage LLC in its other markets. Terms and conditions apply.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for staying with us. We have a guest on the show today, veteran political reporter Bill Cotterell, who is stationed in Tallahassee, Florida, and he's covered politics in Georgia. You work for the Miami Herald, Tallahassee Democrat, UPI. Bill, welcome to the show. I love having you on here.
Thank you for inviting me.
People on social media, I started thinking about Florida because people on social media during election night started raving about Florida and how a few hours after the polls closed, the state was close to 100% of votes counted, which is sort of a reversal from, a couple of decades ago. And I don't know if that was a Republican response because they did well or what. But what was the barometer inside the Florida state lines?
Well, I think perhaps 24 years ago when we had the presidency undecided, for 37 days, and finally George W. Bush won Florida by 537 votes, state officials kind of took a hard assessment of what was wrong and why several counties had such huge problems, and they set about very serious. I think Jeb Bush gets credit, as well as the Democrats at that time, the Attorney General, Bob Butterworth, who was a Democrat. They said, let's just fix it and not have this ever again. And they put in a great deal of reforms, one of which was the expansion of early voting and voting by mail, which the supervisors of elections in the counties, there are 67 separate counties and each runs their own show. But they like to say there's never a line at your kitchen table. So if you use a mailed ballot, you're never going to have to complain about, standing in long lines. And of course, early voting has now been expanded to 10 or 12 days. Different counties may shorten it some. Some go right up to the edge, like the Sunday before. They need Monday to set up the equipment and get ready for live voting. But a lot of the counties go right up to Sunday and let people vote 12 hours a day even, which I think makes it much more efficient and encourages a lot of people who otherwise might not be able to, or at least might find it very inconvenient to get to the polls. So I heard no complaints before the election of any problems at the polls. There were no lawsuits or, mistakes, people losing a lot of ballots. It ran very, very smoothly.
Well, since the 2020 election, and you've had Donald Trump criticizing early voting, you've had the two parties sort of migrating apart on the voting laws, with Republicans going toward election integrity and Democrats wanting it more easy to vote. Um,
Mhm.
has there been any push in Tallahassee or any effort to round up support for actually retreating on early voting?
I haven't heard anyone come right out and say it. Before the election, there were a couple of Republican legislators who insisted on very tight security, keeping polling places, having observers from both parties, if necessary, policemen. The governor created, I think, in the last year and a half, an elections integrity police force that went through the rolls. They excluded some people. They even arrested a few, I think about 20 people statewide, not very many, had registered illegally. Nobody actually went to jail or got really fined over it. If they were mistaken, people misunderstood. 2 years ago, we adopted a constitutional amendment that restored voting rights for convicted felons. And I think actually it's 4 years ago. But I believe a lot of people may have mistakenly thought they were eligible, thought they could register, and mistakenly got registered and had to be stricken from the polls. And of course, always a certain number of non-citizens, people who apply for citizenship and then mistakenly think they can therefore vote. But those things, they were relatively minor. I don't think there was certainly no big concerted effort to fraudulently swing the election or have massive, illegal voting. There was some honest mistakes and people who, through misunderstanding, may have gone and registered or even tried to vote and had been turned away. But it was very small in number, and I don't think there was certainly any organized criminal intent. And of course, the election might have had a county commission seat or something, school board that might have been close, but Donald Trump carried the state by well over 1 million votes. Constitutional amendments were decided one way or the other by substantial numbers. I think 3 or 4% in a few cases. They were there was no doubt as to the outcome.
Okay, yeah, very good. And I think you said this, but the people who were arrested, none of those that you're aware of actually went to jail or anything like that.
Yeah. A lot of them were very elderly people, poorly educated, perhaps, maybe didn't speak the language clearly, and they had misunderstood. They didn't understand some of the technicalities. But the legislative leadership has not, and the governor have not been talking any plans to reform things. Like after the 2000 fiasco, when we had so many ballots disqualified and people who didn't know the rules and didn't have their votes counted. Since then, the state has undertaken very serious reform. And I think the parties and the candidates have done a good job of educating their voters, make sure that their people know when voting is allowed and when the polls are open, and how to get a mail ballot in, how to get it signed and correctly recorded.
And no more butterfly ballots anywhere in the state, I would presume, in 24 years.
Yes, we've had secure systems. They don't have, here again, the candidates and the parties, I think, and a lot of civic organizations, the League of Women Voters, activist groups, labor unions, people like that have gone to their membership and said, okay, you don't want to see the ballot for the first time when you step into the polls. Put up a poster and say, okay, this is what you're going to see. And you only vote one candidate in each race. Don't turn the page and vote a second time, for US Senate, because you'll disqualify your ballot. I think voter education is a lot better now than it was in past years. And the election supervisors, I think, have done a lot of paid advertising and free, public service announcements. Get the word out so that if you care, if you're really interested, it's not hard to vote.
Yeah, and this is just something else I've thought of since I got you here talking about Florida politics. I mean, they could have a Senate Majority Leader and a Secretary of State, if the mumblings are correct, from Florida. I'm wondering whether that affects DeSantis's effort to rise beyond the state lines.
The governor's out of the country right now, but if Marco Rubio resigns, and of course, he doesn't really have to resign, I guess, until January 20th. Governor DeSantis is term limited out in 2026. And if he has any plans beyond that, of course, he could appoint himself to the Senate and he would take a lot of hits, criticism for a week or two. But he's very powerful and very popular. He could ride that out. Or he could appoint a seat warmer, someone like his chief of staff, perhaps. That's what happened once before. Appoint somebody to fill in the 2 years until 2026, and then there'll be an election in which Ron DeSantis could run. And he could certainly keep his national profile that way if he became a U.S. senator when the job is open in 2028. It would be a lot easier. We had Ronald Reagan and Jimmy Carter both left office as governor, sat around 2 years, campaigned 76, respectively. Carter made it. But I think it would be a lot easier for DeSantis those 2 years if he was a U.S. senator, obviously. And there are a lot of other Republicans who are currently angling to run for governor in 2026 when DeSantis can no longer run for that job. But I would not be surprised. He's a young man and he's extremely strong in this state. The Republican Party is extremely strong. They've got a 1 million vote majority in registration. And I'm certain we haven't heard the last of Ron DeSantis.
Speaking of Jimmy Carter, I would be crazy for not asking you to reflect a little bit. You covered President Carter's first run for president out of Georgia, am I right?
That's true. He was governor in 1974. UPI sent me up to Atlanta. They didn't want to waste one of their Washington experts on a guy who didn't have a chance. So they sent me to Atlanta, a lot of 75 and 76. And then I stayed in Atlanta and he went to Washington. But the power base, the conditions, of course, were much different after Watergate, and the Democrats were having a very good year. 26 is going to be different. I think a well-known popular Republican like DeSantis, his first thing that he'd have to do would be to overcome J.D. Vance. The vice president certainly would be the front runner in 2028. But in the past, as we've seen, outsiders have won more often than not in recent election presidential cycles.
Any anecdotes about Carter, sort of the man that might either surprise us or just, anything you saw on the campaign trail that shows a little bit of a window into who he is?
Yeah, actually, I think a lot of people were surprised, including myself, even though I'd covered the last year and a half of his time as governor. His kind of simplicity and appeal to the public. He did things like he carried his own luggage whenever he got off the airplane. He didn't have them play Hail to the Chief when the usher at the White House would say, "Ladies and gentlemen, the President of the United States." He had the usher just say, "Ladies and gentlemen," and everyone would rise. We all, I think, thought it was an act. Sunday school, things like that. people were saying, who invited the Boy Scout? But coming right after the Watergate and some of the scandals in Washington, that kind of simplistic, down-home honesty image, I think it was borne out after his defeat when he worked with Habitat for Humanity and went around the world monitoring elections in, African countries and working for the Carter Center, working for vaccines and really healthcare in countries that were very poor and third world countries. I think his post-presidency showed really the kind of man that at the time we sort of thought, well, this is just a really smart politician, and it was an act. But his genuineness, I think, we've seen in the years since he left the White House. A lot of Southern politicians I've heard make jokes that if we could have just elected him to the former presidency and skipped the 4 years in the White House, elect him straight to the ex-presidency. But he has been a fine individual, and I think there are just many examples through his life where he used to say during the campaign, part of his standard stump speech, he'd say, I don't have to be president. There are some things that, I won't do. And we in the press all kind of looked at each other and said, yeah, sure. That's why you're working 20 hours a day and, campaigning so hard for it. But I think he really meant it. It was just a type of guy he was and is, although he's in hospice care now, sadly.
Yeah, he is. Bill, I got one simple question that I always like to ask veteran reporters. Who's your most fascinating interview?
Oh, gee, I don't know. There were the late governor of Florida, Lawton Chiles, used to say that he had reached the don't give a damn stage of his life. He had been a U.S. Senator for 18 years. He was elected governor. And sometimes he would say that, he was going to do what he believed in and say what he meant. And if people didn't like it, he didn't give a damn. And interviewing him very often, he'd give you a one-word answer. I asked him one time in 1984, President Reagan was up for re-election, and we had an interview set up, and I said, well, do you think there's any chance Walter Mondale can beat Ronald Reagan tomorrow? And he said, no. And I went, and can you explain? He said, no, he can't. And Lawton Chiles was the probably a unique politician in which he didn't, if he had a recorded set answer, it might be one or two words. And I don't think I've ever known another politician who couldn't talk 5 minutes on any topic you want. And very frequently at that time, I remember other Democrats that year were saying, oh, sure. Claude Pepper, the late congressman, was saying, oh, I think the people reject Ronald Reagan. Walter Mondale's going to win. And Lawton Chiles just looked at me and said, nope. What else you got? I would say, I think that's the only time I ever got a one-word answer. I worked in both Carolinas, Alabama, over there in Birmingham, where you are, back in 1969, then Miami and Tallahassee. And now Governor Chiles, when he wanted to expand on a topic, he could talk. But when it didn't need to be, he just, as some of the country politicians will say, put the hay down where the sock can get it. And that was his style.
Excellent. Walking Lawton Chiles. Bill Cotterell, it was an honor to be able to speak to you. I appreciate you taking the time to come on. And I know the listeners appreciate it as they mull, early voting going forward in Alabama, whether or not that's, going to be a thing. So thanks so much, Bill.
Of course, there's nothing stopping you from voting on election day. You can pass early voting and nobody has to, but it's very convenient.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. And thanks everybody out there for listening to us. We're going to be back here. We're going to be back here tomorrow. Until then, come on by and see what we're doing on the internet at al.com.